You can be intelligent, capable, even accomplished, and still feel strangely small around successful people. Not jealous, not inspired, just exposed. Like everyone else belongs in the room except you. You start monitoring yourself. Your voice changes slightly. You explain yourself too much. You laugh carefully. And afterward you replay everything you said. Not because anything went wrong, but because something inside you quietly believes, they're real, I'm performing. What's strange is, this feeling often gets stronger the more potential you actually have. And the reason has less to do with confidence than you think. Most people assume this feeling comes from insecurity, but insecurity is only the surface. The deeper experience is identity instability. Around successful people, you stop feeling like a person and start feeling like a comparison. Your brain begins measuring invisible things. Who speaks better? Who sounds smarter? Who seems more certain? Who belongs naturally? And suddenly, you become hyper-aware of yourself. Not your ideas, not the conversation, yourself. This is why even simple interactions feel exhausting. You rehearse sentences before saying them. You explain your achievements defensively, or you hide them completely. Sometimes you become overly agreeable, other times strangely quiet, not because you lack personality, but because your nervous system is trying to avoid social rejection. Behavioral psychology calls this self-monitoring. Your brain starts observing your own behavior in real time, adjusting constantly based on perceived judgment. The problem is, the more you monitor yourself, the less natural you feel. And the less natural you feel, the more fake you seem to yourself. So you try harder, which makes it worse. This creates a hidden contradiction. You want to be respected for who you are, while simultaneously hiding parts of who you are. And over time, this changes more than social behavior. It changes identity. You stop asking, what do I think? And start asking, what version of me works here? That question slowly splits people in half. But this pattern usually begins much earlier than adulthood. Your brain is constantly predicting social safety, not truth. Safety. Neuroscience shows that the brain processes social rejection similarly to physical pain. To your nervous system, exclusion is not just uncomfortable, it feels threatening. So when you enter a room with highly successful people, your brain begins threat prediction. Not consciously, automatically. It asks, what version of me minimizes rejection here? This activates what psychologists sometimes call the social self, the adaptive personality you use to survive different environments. Here's the problem. If you stay in adaptive mode too long, you lose access to spontaneous behavior. A simple metaphor. Imagine driving a car while constantly watching yourself through another camera angle. You could still drive, but every movement would feel unnatural. That's what chronic self-monitoring does. Visual. Hard driving at night from overhead perspective. Your attention splits in two. One part participates, the other part watches and judges. Cognitive science calls this divided attentional load, and it reduces fluidity, memory, humor, creativity, even eye contact, which is why you often leave interactions thinking, that didn't feel like me, because neurologically you were partially performing threat management instead of fully being present. And this is where most people misunderstand confidence. Confidence is not thinking highly of yourself, it's reducing internal surveillance. But how do you actually do that without pretending to be fearless? That's where the deeper shift begins. You're the person everyone comes to when something breaks. Not just things, people, situations, emotions. And somehow, you always know what to do. But there's something strange. When it's your own life, you hesitate, you overthink, you stall, you go quiet. Why is it so easy to fix everything else, but not yourself? Visual: person sitting in a dim room, phone lighting their face. Problem deep dive. You've built an identity around being capable, reliable, sharp, the one who figures things out. In conversations, you're already mapping solutions before the other person finishes speaking. At work, you see inefficiencies others ignore. In relationships, you anticipate problems before they happen. It feels like clarity, but there's a cost, because over time you stop asking for help, not because you don't need it, but because it feels unnatural, almost unsafe. Your inner voice sounds different too. It doesn't say, I'm struggling. It says, I should know how to fix this. And when you don't, there's a quiet tension, a pressure to perform competence even in private. Visual: notebook with half-written thoughts, then scratched out. This isn't just a personality trait. It's a pattern, a psychological one, and it usually forms earlier than you think. Reframe. This part matters, because what you've learned to do, this constant fixing, analyzing, solving, isn't a flaw, it's an adaptation. At some point, being the one who understands gave you stability. Maybe things around you were unpredictable. Maybe emotions weren't expressed clearly. Maybe being useful was the safest way to belong. So your brain did something intelligent. It leaned into control, into problem solving, into becoming necessary. Visual: child sitting quietly while observing adults arguing. Not broken, not too much, just trained. But that training came with a blind spot, and it shows up in a very specific way. Psychological mechanism. Your brain treats problems like puzzles, clean, structured, solvable. This is tied to something in cognitive psychology called cognitive closure. It's the brain's desire to resolve uncertainty quickly. When something feels unclear, your mind moves to fix it, because uncertainty feels like a threat. Now here's the catch. Other people's problems look like puzzles. Your problems feel like fog. Visual: foggy street with dim lights. Because when you're involved emotionally, your brain shifts systems. Instead of logical processing, it activates emotional circuits, especially areas linked to self-relevance and identity. So now it's not just a problem, it's you. And the brain doesn't fix the self the same way it fixes a task. Here's a simple model. Outside problems equals map. Inside problems equals weather. You can navigate a map. You can't control the weather. Visual split screen. A clear map versus storm clouds moving. So what do? You try to turn weather into a map. You intellectualize them. You search for solutions. But the more you do that, the more disconnected it feels. Because the system you're using isn't designed for that terrain. And this is where the real shift begins.